All right, so when we're talking about electrolyte balance, what we're doing is we're talking about the gains and loss for the electrolytes, those ions like sodium and potassium and phosphate and stuff like that, negatively charged particles, are balanced between what's coming in and what's going out. Total electrolyte concentrations affects water balance. The more electrolytes you have, the more like inside versus outside, which we just talked about, that's going to drive fluid movement and stuff like that. The concentrations of the individual electrolytes are going to affect cell functions. Potassium and sodium, for example, altogether, they're going to drive fluid movement. Individually, they affect how the cell operates. We measure electrolyte balance in a unit called an equivalent, which is basically the amount of positive or negative ions that supply a mole of electric charge. But I guess that's really all we need to sort of talk about that. It's a way to quantify ions, basically. And you can do, so most of what we're going to be talking about is milliequivalents. So one equivalent is 1,000 milliequivalents. Let's start with sodium. That is the primary cation, that's a positively charged ion in the ECF. This is primarily from sodium chloride and sodium bicarbonate, which is important in the buffer system that we'll talk about in the acid-base balance later. Normal salt concentrations, it's 140 milliequivalents per liter, significantly less in the ICF. Potassium is another one. That's the dominant ion in the ICF. Normal potassium concentrations are about 160 milliequivalents in the ICF. Generally speaking, when we're talking about electrolyte balance, most problems occur with an imbalance between gains and losses of sodium. Problems with potassium are less common, but they're more dangerous. So most of your electrolyte problems are going to be driven by imbalances in sodium. Not so much potassium, but if it happens in potassium, it's a bigger deal. Sodium balance, it's a balance between two factors, uptake by the digestive system and loss by the urinary system, as well as perspiration. You sweat out some of that sodium. If the gains from the digestive system are greater than the losses by the urinary system, then total sodium content rises. That's going to drive water movement out of the cells. If losses of sodium exceed the gains, then water is going to go into the cells. So that's basic. That's typically why if you eat stuff that's really, really salty, you feel really, really thirsty afterwards, basically. Here is a feedback loop looking at sodium balance and ECF volume. The regulatory mechanisms keep this fairly stable. If you increase the sodium level, basically what's going to end up happening is plasma concentrations are going to increase. That's going to trigger osmoreceptors. That's going to basically tell the kidneys to stop producing urine, reabsorb water, promote thirst. This is going to drive the increase of water through the thirst mechanism and limit the loss by concentrating the urine. That's going to bring your sodium concentrations back into balance. If the opposite takes place, then the ECF volume is going to decrease, and that's going to stop the secretion of ADH, which is going to tell the kidneys to keep making water. Thirst is suppressed, so you're not going to feel thirsty anymore. And that's going to bring us back into balance that way. Large changes in ECF volume are going to be corrected by things that regulate blood volume and blood pressure. And I mentioned that as the volume goes up, blood pressure goes up. If volume goes down, blood volume goes down, which means blood pressure is going to go down. And so you can monitor ECF volume by monitoring your blood pressure as well for the large changes in volume. Smaller changes, which you may not notice, are going to be the osmoreceptors in your brain. All right, so here's a feedback loop if you want to take a second to look at this or pull it from the note slides and take a look at it in the notes. This is a feedback loop that is kind of going through some of the things that I'm talking about. It goes into greater detail as far as the hormones that are released. You know, for example, if your blood volume starts to drop, like right here, that's going to trigger ADH and aldosterone for the renin, the angiotensin, renin, aldosterone feedback, as well as ADH to try to limit water loss and bring that water volume back up. And then the opposite is going to happen with those natriuretic peptides to limit excess blood volume and bring those down. Now, if your sodium levels are low, like right here, that is a condition known as hyponatremia, and I think I've already mentioned that. That was terrible. I apologize. I mentioned that earlier. Hypernatremia is when your sodium levels are too high. That's going to drive this upper part of the feedback loop with the natriuretic peptides and trying to lower that blood volume because we've drawn water from the cells into that extracellular fluid. All right, let's talk about potassium for a little bit. Most of the body, 98% of the potassium in your body is found in the ICF. The cells will expend energy to recover potassium that diffuses into the ECF, like in nerve impulse transmission with the sodium-potassium pumps. Concentrations of potassium are a balance between absorption by the digestive system and excretion by the loss of urine. So how much you lose in urine is dependent upon how much you absorb in the digestive system, basically is what that means. Factors that affect potassium secretion into urine include changes in potassium concentration in the ECF. More potassium in the ECF means to more secreted. Changes in pH. The more acidic your blood is, the lower the pH. That decreases the amount of potassium that's secreted in the urine. And aldosterone levels also affect potassium loss in urine. Disorders of potassium imbalance include hypokalemia. Hypokalemia is not enough potassium in the bloodstream, which are caused, like for example, this is caused by an endocrine disorder, which has excessive aldosterone secretion, which leads to overstimulating sodium retention and potassium loss. Hyperkalemia is too much potassium in the bloodstream, which can lead to cardiac arrhythmias. All right. Calcium balance is another big one, that's another ion that's found in your body. It's the most abundant mineral found in the body. Gains in potassium come from the digestive tract, reabsorption in the kidneys, and both of the gains are stimulated by parathyroid hormone and calcitriol, which are important, in the endocrine system that we talked about last semester. Losses of calcium come from bile, urine, and feces. Typically the losses are very, very small, which is about 0.03% of the calcium reserve in your skeleton. So most of the calcium that you take in stays, basically. Hypercalcemia is having too much calcium. This is typically caused by hyperparathyroidism. Your parathyroid is too active, releasing too much PTH. This can also be caused by malignant cancers and excessive calcium and vitamin D supplement intake. So you kind of have to be careful about taking extra calcium and vitamin D if you have a lot of, like if you're consuming a lot of fortified dairy and stuff like that. Hypokalemia is too low. This is usually caused by hypoparathyroidism, so your parathyroid is not working as fast as it needs to. Vitamin D deficiencies and renal failure. Magnesium is a big one. Your body contains about 29 grams of magnesium, not a whole ton. Magnesium ions are primarily found in the ICF. It's important for enzymatic reactions. It's absorbed by the kidneys and put back into the bloodstream. It's also used in phosphorylation of glucose, which is converting it into energy, and used by ATP in the muscle fibers as well. Phosphate is an important one for bone mineralization and making them strong and stuff like that. In the ICF, phosphate is required for making high-energy compounds, activating enzymes, and synthesizing nucleic acids because one of the elements of the nucleotide is a phosphate. Y'all remember that because Mr. Munich is a good teacher. Chloride is another important one. We don't think about chloride a lot. It's kind of a big deal in the stomach. They're most abundant anions. Anions are negative ions. Let's get the right thing this time. In the ICF, the concentrations are usually pretty low. It is absorbed across the digestive tract with the sodium, and it's reabsorbed with sodium by carrier proteins in the renal tubules, which you looked at in the last two videos. All right, third one, we have acid-base balance. When we're talking about acid-base balance, we're talking about things like pH and stuff like that, which is a matter of how acidic or alkaline. Acidic is less than 7. Alkalinity is greater than 7. pH is 0 to 14. The closer towards neutral, which is 7, the weaker you are, the farther away the strong you are. ECF ranges are usually 7.35 to 7.45, very narrow, very close to neutral, slightly basic. So like maybe doesn't get the full bore pumpkin latte with all of the stuff, maybe just the regular pumpkin latte, probably not the scarf. Let's see. Acidosis is when you have an abnormally low blood pH. This is like less than 7. Acidemia is when the blood just simply drops below 7.35. Alkalosis is the opposite. Alkalemia is when it's slightly more basic. Abnormally high is alkalosis. Now, we want to try to avoid those two states because that would stink for your cells and you as a general person. Specifically, these two conditions will affect the nervous and the cardiovascular systems. Acidosis is more common, both are dangerous, because normal cellular activities regularly generate acids. It's just more difficult to make your body alkaline, essentially. So what we want to do is we want to control the hydrogen ions, we want to control the pH of our cells and our bodies to make sure that things don't go out of whack. Because the problem is proteins really like a narrow band of pH, and if you get too alkaline or too acidic, then we change the formation of the proteins so they don't work very well. And as we talked about in class prior to this, we know that proteins basically drive everything in your body, so we don't want to mess with the proteins. All right, so when we're talking about acids, we can talk about 3 different kinds. We can talk about fixed acids, which are acids that remain in solution and have to be removed by the kidneys. We've got metabolic acids, which are byproducts of metabolic activities like lactic acid. These don't really accumulate. They tend to break down pretty quickly. Fixed acids can accumulate, and that's typically what drives the acidosis thing. We've also got volatile acids, and those are going to leave when you breathe. The main one that we'll talk about with that one is carbonic acid, that has to do with carbon dioxide. Now, speaking of carbon dioxide and pH are related to each other. Most of the time when you dissolve carbon dioxide in water, it reacts with the water to create carbonic acid, H3CO4. And this is sort of floating around in your blood and stuff like that. Once it does that, it's going to dissociate, which that just means split apart into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. Now, this is going to be related to the partial pressure of carbon dioxide and how much carbon dioxide you have in your blood. Now, if you remember, if you were paying attention when we talked about the respiratory system, how your body determines how much oxygen you have is based on how much carbon dioxide is dissolved in the blood, and it does that by measuring the pH of your blood. So, here's how it works. If pH decreases, that means you have more hydrogen atoms dissolved in your blood, which means you have more bicarbonate ions in your blood. In order to get more of those ions in your blood, you have to have more carbonic acid dissolved in your blood. In order to get more carbonic acid dissolved in your blood, you have to have more carbon dioxide dissolved in your blood. Now, if you have more carbon dioxide dissolved in your blood, that means you don't have enough oxygen in your bloodstream. That increases respiratory rate, increases heart rate to get that oxygen into your bloodstream. The opposite works. As the pH starts to go up, that means there's not as much carbon dioxide dissolved in your blood. That means you need to slow down that respiration rate. And then you hit that sweet spot where it's your resting respiration rate, and the pH is within that 7.35 to 7.45 range. All right, now, that whole process takes place through the work of an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. Now, this is going to take carbon dioxide and water and actually make carbonic acid. Now, you can find carbonic anhydrase in the cytoplasm of red blood cells, liver and kidney cells, and parietal cells in your stomach, as well as many other cells. All right, pH control. So you have to balance gains and losses of hydrogen ions. The anions we're not so much concerned about because they're not the ones that are driving the acid-base reactions. We gain hydrogen ions in the digestive tract and through formation of acids through metabolic activities. We lose hydrogen ions through the kidneys and the lungs. Now, but wait, Mr. Thompson, we don't breathe out hydrogen ions. We breathe out carbon dioxide. So remember, it's tied to carbon dioxide levels. If you remove the carbon dioxide from that carbonic acid equation, you're left with water. And so that's how you are going to change the pH by losing that carbon dioxide. All right, you have to neutralize acid. You have to neutralize hydrogen ions, I guess I should say. Otherwise, you can damage tissue activity, metabolic activity, and stuff like that. Now, acids that are produced by metabolic activity are temporarily neutralized by buffers. So here's the thing. They sort of absorb the hydrogen ions, but the hydrogen ions are still there and they could potentially cause trouble. So we still have to get rid of those hydrogen ions, and the only way that you can really get rid of hydrogen ions is by your kidneys getting rid of them. Now, speaking of buffers are compounds that are dissolved in solution that can stabilize the pH of a solution. So basically, as you introduce hydrogen ions, they're going to grab those hydrogen ions and resist that's going to allow the pH to resist changing. I guess a better way to say that's going to allow the fluid to resist changes in pH. I guess is what I should have said. Weak acids donate hydrogen ions. Weak bases absorb hydrogen ions. And so basically, it's kind of like a sponge, heat sink. I don't know, whatever you want to think about it. The buffer systems can usually have a combination of weak acids and a negative ion released by the dissociation. The anion is going to function as the weak base to grab that hydrogen ion as they get added in. In solution, the molecules of acid and anion exist in equilibrium, so we have equal amounts, basically is what that means. There are three major buffer systems: the phosphate and the protein and the carbonic acid bicarbonate buffer system. Let's see. The first one is the phosphate buffer system, which is this one right here. And the phosphate buffer system consists of phosphoric acid, which is H2PO4 minus, and HPO4 2 minus. You don't really have to know the chemistry parts of that. And this is important for buffering the pH of the ICF and the urine. Remember the electrolyte breakdown, one of the major ions in the ICF is phosphate. We have the protein buffer system. The protein buffer system, let me back up. There we go. Relies on amino acids to be the weak bases and absorb those hydrogen ions. This is important in the ECF and the ICF. And so basically what ends up happening is you have certain functional groups, which is this R group right here. We talked about it super duper briefly at the very beginning of the school year. This group is basically going to be the part that either releases a hydrogen ion to become a weak acid or to absorb an ion in order to be a weak base. And so this is really important within the cells. Okay, another protein buffer system within this, besides the sort of general protein with the R group thing, is the hemoglobin buffer system. Now, I would like to, before I get into that, I would like to say that the one that I just talked about is the amino acid buffer system. I know I'm kind of all over the place. You can also kind of see that with the plasma protein one. Now, hemoglobin is a different one, and it's only in red blood cells. It may kind of make sense because only red blood cells have hemoglobin. But basically what happens, and the textbook kind of talks about this, in great detail, and I mentioned it like in the teeny tiny little detail when we talked about the circulatory system in blood and stuff like that. And also I think in the respiratory system when we talked about CO2 concentrations and partial pressure and all that other stuff. So basically what ends up happening is this is where we get with the carbon dioxide dissolving in the water, having those associations. The bicarbonate is actually going to, along with chloride ions, are going to dissolve into the plasma, and the hemoglobin is going to absorb the hydrogen ions. Then that kind of switches over once you get to the lungs, and that's how we pop the carbon dioxide out. So if you need to, I would say go back and look at your notes and review that particular section. As far as the mechanics of how that particular system works. Okay, so we've got the carbonic acid carbonate buffer system. It involves carbon dioxide, which is constantly generated by body cells. Most of that carbon dioxide is converted to carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is going to split into hydrogen bicarbonate. This is going to prevent changes in pH caused by metabolic acids and fixed acids in the ECF, and allow the blood with the hydrogen ions to be transported to the kidneys so we can purge those extra hydrogen ions. Limitations to this system: it cannot protect the ECF from changes that result in increased or decreased levels of carbon dioxide. It functions only when the respiratory system and the circulatory systems are working normally. And the ability to buffer is limited by bicarbonate availability. So if you don't have the bicarbonate ions, you can't really utilize this buffer system, basically. However, bicarbonate shortage is rare because your body fluids have a large amount of sodium bicarbonate as a reserve. So you don't typically have to worry about that. The bigger two issues would be the respiratory system and the circulatory system working normally. That would be the biggest one, I would say. So here's a breakdown if you want to take a second. Maybe pause the video right here. You can find this in the note slides. Take a look at this. This is basically sort of breaking down what's going on with the buffer system and stuff like that. And I've explained it a bunch of times by now. If you don't have it memorized, then I stink as a teacher, I guess I should say. What do we got? Limits of buffer systems. They only provide temporary solutions. They sort of remove hydrogen ions from causing trouble, but they don't eliminate hydrogen ions. And your supply of buffer molecules is limited. So if you run out of buffer molecules, then you start changing the pH of your blood. So if we're regulating these, captured hydrogen, like I said, has to be tied up in water as CO2 is removed from the lungs, has to be removed by the kidneys. The balance is you're balancing between gains and losses. So you have a lot of coordination with the respiratory system and the renal system, the kidney system. Let's see. They help each other by secreting and absorbing hydrogen, controlling excretion of acids and bases, generating additional buffers. We're getting close to the end, so stay with me here. Come on, you can do it. Splash some cold water on your face or something like that. We're going to talk about disorders of the acid-base balance. So serious and prolonged disturbances can result into a lot of really nasty things, including respiratory performance, renal function, cardiovascular conditions like heart failure, central nervous system problems like nerve damage, and effects to reflexes, a lot of really bad stuff. Respiratory acid-base disorders result from imbalances between CO2 generation and CO2 excretion, which causes abnormal CO2 levels in the ECF. Metabolic acid-base disorders result from overgeneration of metabolic or fixed acids in the body. That's getting into acidosis or, alkalosis. So respiratory acidosis means you're not eliminating enough CO2. This can also be, it's caused by hypoventilation, so you're not breathing as well. If you have significant respiratory issues like COPD and stuff like that, this can be a real big problem. That can lead to hypercapnia, which is high blood CO2 levels. Respiratory alkalosis is caused by hyperventilation, so your respiration rate is significantly higher than physiologically it needs to be. That can lead to hypocapnia, which is very low blood pH. That's going to cause your blood to become more alkaline. Metabolic acidosis and metabolic alkalosis. Three major causes of metabolic acidosis include high production of fixed or metabolic acids, including lactic acid, which is lactic acidosis, and ketoacidosis is another one. Impaired hydrogen secretion or excretion by the kidneys, and severe bicarbonate ion loss. Alkalosis is caused by elevated bicarbonate concentrations and a severe decrease in hydrogen ion concentration. Let's see. These two, respiratory and metabolic acidosis, are typically linked. Low oxygen results in generation of lactic acid. That's why your muscles burn when you first start working out. Hypoventilation leads to low arterial oxygen partial pressure. Detection of acidosis and alkalosis includes measuring pH, which you can see there, measuring partial pressure of carbon dioxide, measuring bicarbonate levels, And then based on the diagnosis, looking at these checkpoints, blood pH, partial pressures, things like that, then you determine if it is respiratory or metabolic. And then based on the condition, if you look at it, for example, severe diarrhea could be one, chronic renal failure, which is significantly more of a problem, CNS damage right there, that's kind of a bad one, fever, stuff like that. You can basically make your diagnosis at that point and then move forward from there. All right, let's talk about what happens to your renal system and your ability to maintain fluid, ion, and pH changes as you get older. Fetal pH control is driven by buffers that do short-term control. The baby kidneys don't do that whole much. Mama does most of the heavy lifting. As a newborn, body water content is very high, 75%. Babies have they're squishy and soft and stuff like that. The basic aspects of electrolyte balance are the same as adults. Their kidneys basically start working once they're born. As we get older, so under 40, 50, 60% of your body weight is water. That tends to go down as you get older. So 50 to 60, we're looking at 55% in males and 47% in females. So, older females are more solid stuff than water stuff at this point. After 60, it gets even lower. In males, it's 50% water. In females, it's 45% water. As you get older, your body gets tired and it can't really work as well as it used to. So decreased ability to dilute waste, toxins, and drugs because you have less water in your system. The fewer functioning nephrons and a reduced GFR, which means you have less of an ability to regulate your pH by purging urine by your kidneys. Your ability to concentrate urine declines, which means you're more likely to lose water through urine. Also, as your skin gets thinner, insensible perspiration increases, so water just is more easily just evaporates through your skin, basically. What else? You have to drink more water because it's more difficult to keep water in. ADH and aldosterone sensitivity goes down, which means you're less able to conserve water when losses exceed gains, so it's much easier to become more dehydrated. Your overall mass, especially muscle and skeletal, decreases, which leads to a overall decreasing in body mineral intake. Think the calcium and the phosphate and stuff like that. That loss can be provided by increased dietary supplements and exercise. Let's see, what else? Let's look at all the other reasons why getting old sucks. Reduced respiratory compensation, which increases your risk of respiratory acidosis. And this is aggravated by emphysema and arthritis. Disorders that affect major systems become more common as you get older. And that's it, I think. I mean, the slideshow's over anyway, so I don't have any more for that. And I suppose that's probably enough, I think. Big takeaways. A lot of these balances are juggling between intake primarily by the digestive system and elimination primarily by the kidneys and the renal system, urinary system. The lungs, surprisingly enough, have a lot of help in all of this, especially with pH regulation and stuff like that. Fluid intake is going to be, largely regulated by electrolyte concentration, though it can happen the other way, so if you drink too much water too fast. Acid-base balance is pretty important. Buffers, we've got those, so those are pretty cool. You may want to go back and review some of those concepts and stuff like that. Maybe review some of the other stuff from some of the other videos. If you have any questions, let me know. Send me a remind message. Send me an email. Ask me in class. Drop a comment below. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Otherwise, that's it for me here. I look forward to seeing you again soon.